Trevor learned that even authority could be questioned. Around the dinner table, disagreement birthed new ways of seeing. He explores how questioning can spark creativity.
There's some classic research looking at families, looking at what does it take to raise a creative child. And it turns out that creative children come from families, more often than not, that had regular arguments and disagreements.
Really?
Yeah. So if you want to raise a creative kid, you can at least increase the probability. I'm not sure if it's causal, but by arguing with your spouse a little bit more.
What do you think that is? I have an idea, but I'd love to know what you think that is.
Well, I want to hear your hunch before I tell you what I think, because I've been thinking about this for a long time.
So here's what I think it is. I think the reason children who grow up in houses that are a little more argumentative might be a little more creative is because they're existing in an environment where there isn't one way to think. And so what happens is they're both stumbling on what I like to call third thoughts, right? I had this idea when I was working on The Daily Show with my team. And I'd say, I think everyone has a thought, right? And then you can have a second thought even by yourself. But I think there's this elusive third thought that can only come from two different thoughts clashing together and forming a third thought that isn't from one specific place.
Yep.
And so I think if you are watching people who don't agree as a child, people who you generally love or you care for, etc., you are listening to a person and you are agreeing with them maybe, or just seeing their point of view. You're looking at another person, agreeing with them and seeing their point of view. And then maybe you are holding both, including a third, which might be yours, which is another opinion of it. And that might force your brain to think of more things than just the things that exist, which I think is what creativity fundamentally is.
I love this. Okay, so your theory is cognitive complexity comes from seeing people argue.
Okay.
That you don't
I need to remember all the... You make some of my ideas sound way smarter and fancier than they are, which I like. Cognitive complexity. Write that down. All right.
I just give you terms for things you already know.
Okay, cool.
I also think you learn to be a nonconformist through that same process.
Oh, interesting.
That instead of just defaulting or deferring to whatever an authority figure tells you, you realize, well, there are two different authorities in the room and they don't agree. And I think that can both lead to cognitive complexity, but it can also lead to more courage when it comes to challenging the status quo. Because there's not a right answer coming from above.
There is not one coming from above.
Yep.
You know, it's funny you say this. My mom is very religious. Extremely, extremely religious. But I also think she is one of the most progressive thinkers I've ever come across in my lifetime. And one thing I always noticed as a child was how sometimes she would disagree with the sermon that the pastor gave when we'd leave church. And I'd be like, and I'm just a kid. I'm just sitting in the passenger seat listening. And she goes, I didn't agree with that. I hear where the pastor was coming from, but I think that story of Joseph is not about, and then she'd go into her thing and then I'd be like, but he's the pastor. And she's like, yeah, he's a guy who reads the Bible.
He's not God.
Yeah, but he's not God. He's like, we also have the Bible. And it was an interesting way for me to view even religion, is going like, don't assume that the person who stands on the pulpit has a monopoly on knowledge.
Yeah.
You too have the book that you can read. And so now that makes me wonder now, I'm like, was that part of me, okay, I like this.
I like it too. I mean, you can see both of those effects playing out.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
You're not just going to assume that the pastor's answer is gospel.
Right.
And then you're also not going to be afraid to question what somebody in power says.